You're listening to Pass the Chipotle, the show that will take you to discover the edible treasures of Mexico. Episode 14. Hola everyone, welcome to this episode of Pass the Chipotle, the audible companion of SABOR, This is Mexican Food, a digital magazine that will take you to explore the markets, streets, recipes and traditions that make Mexico an edible paradise. I'm your host, Rocio Carvajal, food historian, cook and author. To find more information about this project, please go to passthechipotle.com. Find the show on Twitter as Chipotle Podcast. You can subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher, and Player FM. Fall has definitely taken over. The vast fields gleam under the timid and pale light of the increasingly short and windy days. In Mexico, farmers are busy preparing to harvest corn, beans, enormous orange and even green calabazas or pumpkins. Autumn announces one of the biggest and highly anticipated celebrations of Mexico, Dia de Muertos. More than any other Mexican tradition, Dia de Muertos has many levels of complexity, as it brings together in a very harmonious syncretism ancient pre-Columbian traditions with Catholic rites that gave way to new spiritual and religious expressions. This fascinating and culturally significant tradition was inscribed in UNESCO's list of intangible cultural heritage of humanity in 2008. Which is why I couldn't let this occasion pass. So I've prepared this special episode exploring exclusively this celebration as tomorrow, October 28th, and until November the 2nd, Dia de Muertos, which is more than one day, will be celebrated nationwide in Mexico. Before we start, I want to thank Latinas in Media magazine, and specifically Alex Tabar for featuring Pass the Chipotle in a piece called 5 Podcasts by Latinas You Don't Want to Miss. I'm so honored that the show was listed, and I've put the link to this article on this episode's description so you can have a read. If this is the first time that you're listening past the Chipotle, there are many episodes for you to enjoy the little-known treasures of Mexico's culinary history, like the story of Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, a poet and scholar at heart who found a passion for culinary alchemy during her life as a nun, or the fascinating floating allotments of the ancient capital of the Aztec Empire. You can also enjoy interviews and learn about edible insect startups with Little Herds and Merci Mercado. You can also enjoy the history of alcohol and nationhood in Mexico with Dr. Deborah Tona from the University of Leicester, and the inspiring career of Mexican expat blogger and traditional cook Meli Martinez, author of Mexico in My Kitchen. And of course the most recent episode featuring Chef Sean Hurrell, owner of Barrio Comida, a Mexican taqueria located in the northeast of England in Newcastle. One story at a time, Pass the Chipotle and SABOR, This is Mexican Food magazine, will change the way you think about Mexican food, cooking and eating. This week's episode is dedicated to those who are first, second or even third generation immigrants who are slowly making their way back, retracing the proverbial steps of their forefathers and reconnecting with their once lost heritage. May your path will take you back home and return feeling whole again. Here it is to all of you. Every culture and civilization that has ever existed has dealt with death in different and very unique ways. Birth and death must have seemed like a true miracle, and no doubt they mystified the early human groups, and around these two unavoidable and powerful events, many myths, rites, and systems of beliefs were created. Studying a culture's relationship with death helps opening fascinating horizons of understanding, in essence, how each culture understands life. Because some might appreciate life as a long, continuous journey, while others see death as a total disruptive event, and this affects directly how human groups live their lives. In ancient central Mexico, the Mexica, who were also called Aztec, developed a very particularly militarized and bellicose culture, in which death had many meanings to them. Apart from being an unavoidable natural consequence of being alive, it was also seen as an ultimate self-sacrifice and the beginning of a long spiritual journey from which they could sometimes return by means of reincarnation. But like I said, this was a very bellicose group in which killing was also a tool of political control, punishment, and revenge. From a surviving Mexica poem, we can have a glimpse of their understanding of death. Let me read this translation for you. We have only come to dream. We came to sleep. It is not true. It is not true. Where shall we go? We only came to be born. Our home is beyond. There, where the skinned are. Do we really live on earth? Not forever, only briefly. We can then grasp that for the Mexica, physical life was a mere stage of existence, and the true essence of the soul could morph once it was free from its earthly form. But we can also sense this feeling of not being entirely sure what's beyond, yet they don't see death as a real end. They believed that people who volunteered to be sacrificed would continue their eternal journey as companions of the sun, along with the women who died during childbirth. But they also believed that, for instance, those who died drowned, they will live a joyous afterlife in the Tlalocan, which was Tlaloc's paradise, who was the god of rain. And children were believed to become jewel-like fruits from the sacred tree of life. Mexico has plenty of archaeological evidence that helps us better understand the specific death rites from the ancient cultures. Some of the oldest findings date from 6,000 years before Christ and are from the valley of Tehuacan in Puebla. And perhaps it is no coincidence because it was precisely there where the agricultural revolution of the Neolithic took place, where corn was first domesticated. And what we've learned from these archaeological findings is that food was almost always present at these burials, which means that ancient indigenous tribes attributed sacred and spiritual powers to specific foods, believing they could even nourish the soul of the departed. I wonder what will they make of our modern relationship to food, and if there are any similar conceptions in our contemporary societies. How much do we value and honor the food that keeps us alive? Think of it, who would like to be buried with a Big Mac combo? Well, returning to the Mexica traditions, the afterlife for the rest of the population that died of natural causes and didn't have a glorious farewell, apparently what was next wasn't easy at all. Those souls were believed to have to carry a 4-year-long path, sorting many dangers in the feared and sinister Mictlan, which was the underworld, ruled by the treacherous god Mictlantecutli, who had a taste for human flesh. This god was worshipped at many temples, but also by the Eagle warriors at the great city of Tenochtitlan in today's Mexico City. Eagle warriors were an elite group of knights known for their fearless and ruthless training and performance in battle. In this long journey, souls could get lost, trapped for eternity in the Mictlan, which is why, very often, people were buried along with a Xoloscuintli, the only dog race native to Mexico. These black-skinned hairless dogs were valued for their loyalty and alleged powers to guide souls through the Mictlan. And oddly enough, these dogs were also part of the Mexica diet, so apparently sometimes they actually ate their best friend. But let me tell you more about how the Mexica used to celebrate the dead. So they carried these very long festivals that lasted for 2 whole months, culminating in very special ceremonial sacrifices that always involved the voluntary participation of people. You see, human sacrifice in ancient Mexico has always been a source of dark tales and gruesome fascination. But the truth is that for them it was one of the highest honors they could aspire to, as it was their belief that by offering their life and bodies to the gods, they would ensure a prosperous and peaceful life for their communities. And that's why these high-profile rituals were always solemnly performed. And according to some ancient surviving codex, we know that only in very special occasions anthropophagy was part of these rituals. That means the eating of human flesh. At the arrival of Spanish conquistadors and the establishment of the colony, the native tribes were forced into converting to Catholicism, and a systematic program to eradicate all quote-unquote pagan savage traditions was actively enforced for hundreds of years. But the fact that the Spanish population was heavily outnumbered by indigenous people, many of the old rites and religious celebrations were actually not erased, but instead they formed a syncretism together with the Christian faith, and it was then during the colonial period that the Dia de Muertos we know and recognize today took shape. The first conceptual change regarding the perception and understanding of death is that, for the Christian faith, death was seen as an end and no return journey, and the afterlife only presented 2 scenarios of salvation or suffering, depending on the way a person carried his or her life. And the second conceptual change was that life under this new religious perspective was regarded as a period of almost constant suffering, a valley of tears and pain, because those things were seen as tests that would challenge a person's faith, and so death was the only way to regain a state of eternal grace. But something didn't quite fit with the ancient conceptions of the indigenous population. After all, they really didn't have a negative perception of death. They knew it wasn't a permanent stage, and that their existence simply took a different path. In other words, they did not fear death, and they were not intimidated by it. They simply didn't buy the idea of living in fear of something that was natural. So, since the notions of death, purgatory and suffering lacked the desired effect that the Catholic Church anticipated, an unspoken and slow syncretism gave way to the assimilation of both traditions, and so the 2-month celebrations of the dead gave way to only 6 days, on the final days of October and the first 2 of November, making them coincide with the Catholic calendar, celebrating All Saints' Day, also called All Hallows' Day, on November the 1st, and All Souls' Day, or the Faithful Departed, on November the 2nd. The cultural assimilation of Spaniards and the rapid growth of the mixed race or mestizo population came hand in hand with a fascinating boom of artistic expressions, music, dances, carnivals, gastronomy, theatre, illustration, and literature became a cultural catalyst, channeling a highly complex and rich mix of worldviews and the creation of a new hybrid culture in which death was often stripped of any gloomy connotations and was instead mocked, ridiculed, and at the same time popular folk art constantly flirted with the idea of taunting and daring death that was often giving the physical aspect of a playful skeleton. During the 19th century, the famous caricaturist and political satirist José Guadalupe Posada was responsible for creating the well-loved character of the Catrina. Catrina is a word used to refer to an elegant woman, except in this case is the skeleton of a woman, dressed in an outrageously flamboyant and colourful attire, with a big hat with flowers and feathers. You can find several images of the Catrina on this episode's blog post on my website, passagepotle.com. It was also during the 19th century that a very famous poetry style known as calaverita or little skull was created, and these poems can be long or short and always written in small rhyming verses to flatter friends, and they're often exchanged during the Day of the Dead. The poems are always playful and often include descriptions of how a person constantly avoids death, but his or her life is inevitably taken by the skinny one, the bony, the cold one, La Catrina. These poems often have an uplifting ending in which the subject has a great time doing what he or she enjoys the most for all eternity in the afterlife. I want to read you a little anonymous calavera poem. I will begin with the Spanish version. Es calavera el inglés, calavera el italiano, lo mismo Maximiliano y el pontífice romano, y todos los cardenales, reyes, duques, concejales, y el jefe de la nación, en la tumba son iguales, calaveras de montón. And now the translation. Englishmen turn into skeletons, just as Italians do. Same goes for Maximilian, and all cardinals too. Kings, dukes, and advisers, and each and every head of state. In the grave we are all equal, just a bunch of skeletons. And now I've chosen for you a song that is called God Never Dies. This waltz was composed by the Oaxacan violin virtuoso and composer Macedonio Alcalá Prieto. It was originally a symphonic piece, but I'll play for you a rare mariachi version by the famous actor and singer Pedro Infante. The lyrics explore the musician's own reflections on his own mortality. In the opening verse, we hear the following. The sun dies in the hills with a pale dim light, because life in its incessant speed drives us to die. But I don't care knowing that I will have the same end, because I find comfort in the fact that God never dies.
Muere el sol en los montes con la luz que agoniza, pues la vida en su prisa nos conduce a morir. Pero no importa saber que voy a tener el mismo final, porque me queda el consuelo que Dios nunca morirá. Voy a dejar las cosas que amé, la tierra ideal que me vio nacer, pero sé que después habré de gozar la dicha y la paz que en Dios hallaré. Sé que la vida empieza en donde se piensa que la realidad termina. Sé que Dios nunca muere y que se conmueve del que busca su beatitud. Sé que una nueva luz habrá de alcanzar nuestra soledad y que todo aquel que llega a morir, empieza a vivir una eternidad. Muere el sol en los montes con la luz que agoniza, pues la vida en su prisa nos conduce a morir.
The specific rituals and altars prepared for the Day of the Dead take many different forms and have variations according to every region in Mexico. Let's not forget that Mexico is an ethnically diverse country with more than 62 different indigenous groups, but certain commonalities are shared across the nation. Let me walk you through the symbolism of a Day of the Dead altar from central Mexico. The altar itself represents a portal that connects the world of the living with the world of the dead. According to regional and even local traditions, these altars, also called ofrendas, can be built and dressed at home or right at the cemetery, using the tomb of one or several of the deceased family members as a platform to build it. There are literally dozens of variations of altars that go from the very humble to the highly sophisticated that resemble true architectural pieces consisting of different levels on which very distinctive elements are often present. The altars for Dia de Muertos are basically understood as a true mestizo celebration that has both European and indigenous influence and traditions. The burning of incense and copal, along with the presence of candles and water, are aimed to guide the souls of the departed back home, to purify them after their long journey. Photographs and sugar skulls with the names of the deceased are placed at the altar, not only because it's a way to remember them, but people believe that this helps the spirits recognize their own altar and enjoy it. Some communities, however, believe that the souls are just not able to recognize their own photography, so they place mirrors to allow them to see their reflection and then recognize it. As you can see already, the incorporation of very modern objects such as photography have quickly become re-signified as cultural and even sacred objects that have found very specific ritualistic purpose in these altars. I'm gonna make a second pause now because I want you to listen to this beautiful folk song called La Llorona, the Crying Woman. This is the story of a man who is in love with the spectral presence of the ghost of a woman, and he grieves for the fact that they can't be together. The version you're gonna hear now is interpreted by the great folk singer Susana Harp and the Symphony Orchestra of Oaxaca.
Nace el sol, ay llorona, en el mar nace la luna. En el cielo nace el sol, ay llorona, en el mar nace la luna. Y en el corazón me nace, ay llorona, quererte como a ninguna. Y en el corazón me nace, ay llorona, quererte como a ninguna. Ay, de mi llorona, llorona de azul silvestre. Ay, de mi llorona, llorona de azul silvestre. Con tu rebozo en el aire, llorona, para decir Llorona, las flores del campo santo. No sé qué tienen las flores, Llorona, las flores del campo santo, que cuando las mueve el viento, Llorona, parece que están llorando. Que cuando las mueve el viento, Llorona, parece que están llorando. Ay, de mí, Llorona, Llorona, tú eres mi yunca. Ay, de mí, Llorona, Llorona, tú eres mi yunca. Me quitarán de quererte, ay, Llorona, pero de olvidarte nunca. Me quitarán de quererte, ay, Llorona, pero de olvidarte nunca. Canto, Llorona, tengo el corazón alegre. No creas que porque canto, Llorona, tengo el corazón alegre. También de dolor se canta, y Llorona, cuando llorar no se puede. También de dolor se canta, y Llorona, cuando llorar no se puede. Ay, de mí, Llorona, Llorona del sentimiento. Ay, de mí, Llorona, Llorona del sentimiento. El que no sabe de amores, Llorona, no sabe lo que yo siento. El que no sabe de amores, Llorona, no sabe lo que yo siento.
Growing up, I remember how very diligently my paternal grandmother, Rebecca, would prepare a full breakfast, lunch and dinner, and place it at the altar to feed the souls of her parents and that of my own granddad. And we will put the traditional bread from central Mexico called hojaldras, which is a type of brioche-like pastry shaped in the form of a pile of bones, and topped with either sugar or sesame seeds, exclusively for the enjoyment of the spirits. Along with that, special treats such as their favorite drinks, sweeties, and even cigarettes were often seen at the altar, along with specially significant objects that belonged to the visiting souls. Another important element that comes straight from ancient traditions is the presence of flowers, like nube, as it's called in Mexico, a tiny white flower that you might know by the name of baby's breath. Flor de terciopelo, or velvet flower, is a very unusual looking inflorescence covering what feels and looks like tiny magenta feathers that give the impression and feel of velvet fabric. But without a doubt, it is cempasúchitl, or marigold, as you might know it, the flower that not only dresses the altars with its beautiful and distinctive orange color, but also perfumes the whole season. On a quick note, I want to mention that this flower is neither African nor Indian, but native to central Mexico, which was exported to Africa, India, and Europe during the Columbian Exchange. So while in India this flower is associated to celebrations like weddings, in Mexico everybody knows just by looking or smelling them that the Day of the Dead is coming soon. Some communities make marigold bunting to decorate the altars, while others simply make floral arrangements, but most towns in central Mexico also use the petals of the cempasúchil to make little carpets that start right outside the front door, leading the way in where the altar is located. In many regions, themed cut-out paper, or papel picado, is also present as part of the decorations, and the designs can be incredibly complex and yet very delicate, and almost ephemeral, as the tissue paper that is used to make them often doesn't survive beyond a few days. It is believed that exactly at 2 p.m. on November the 1st, the spirits arrive in their homes or go to the cemetery where their families are waiting for them, and they're welcomed with the distinctive aroma of burning incense and prayers, and they are invited to eat from the altar. In many towns and cities all over Mexico, people travel to visit and experience this tradition, and families very generously welcome strangers at their homes, offering them food, sometimes hot chocolate and bread, or just a comfortable chair to sit and accompany them for a little while. Whether you are religious or not, it is hard not to notice and feel the devotion and care put in the making of these traditions. And even if you have never met these families before, it is indeed a very special and intimate way to share the commonality of our own mortality and witness the absolute certainty that moves Mexicans to welcome the invisible presence of the souls. On November the 2nd, families usually spend some time at cemeteries, cleaning and dressing the tombs, burning copal and lighting candles. It is not unusual to see mariachi bands singing as mourners share anecdotes of happy times with their deceased friends and family members. On November the 3rd, once the celebration have concluded, the altar is dismantled and friends and family are invited to join for a dinner of hot chocolate, champurrado or atole, which are hot sweet drinks made with corn masa, and the pastries that were taken off the altar. This act brings closure to the many emotions relived on the past days and helps create family and community bonds over these traditions and the notion of togetherness. The descriptions I've made today are based on how Dia de Muertos or Day of the Dead is celebrated in central Mexico, but there are many rich and very famous different traditions like that of Pátzcuaro in Michoacán, Mixquic in the state of Mexico, and Xochimilco in Mexico City. I will post links and photos on this episode blog post on my website about these different traditions. To wrap up this episode, I want to finish by saying that in recent decades, the rapid incorporation of elements from other cultures and even ways of celebrating Dia de Muertos has created new forms of cultural expressions. For instance, many children now dress up to go trick-or-treating as Catrinas, Frida Kahlo, and also wearing many other traditional Mexican costumes. You might remember the somehow recent 007 film Spectre that was filmed in Mexico, portraying a large Day of the Dead carnival in the streets of Mexico City. The truth is that there is no such tradition, or at least there wasn't, and never before in the history of Mexico a Day of the Dead carnival had taken place. However, the Mexican public reacted so well to this idea that from that very year onwards, a Dia de Muertos carnival now takes place in Mexico City. As you can see, this only shows how flexible cultural traditions can be, and without falling into the trap of cultural relativism that aims to maintain such expressions untouched, we must understand that life and culture, by consequence, are the result of a constant flow of ideas, exchange, and transformation, and it is the ultimate decision of those who own such traditions to adapt and decide what works for them. And even with the addition of these and many other foreign elements into this tradition, we can say that Dia de Muertos remains, by far, a cultural pillar for Mexicans of all ethnic groups from every city and every community. Dia de Muertos speaks to the very core of our essence, of what defines us as Mexicans, a multi-ethnic, European, indigenous and mestizo nation. Dia de Muertos is a tradition that indeed is very much alive. Day or night, the busy streets of Mexico's towns and cities are constantly buzzing with music, people, and the delicious smells that emanate from an unimaginable and amazing range of foods, snacks, and drinks. The fall issue of SABOR, This is Mexican Food, celebrates the world-famous Mexican street food and the cultural value of the nation's rich and ethnically diverse cooking traditions. With more than 16 emblematic recipes from the grand Mexican street food repertoire and 5 in-depth articles exploring the memorable stories of immigration and entrepreneurship, of family recipes and the shared cultures to inspire you making a delicious cultural feast. To know more about the wonderful articles and recipes to bring the irresistible Mexican street food into your home, go to pasechipotle.com/magazine. Take SABOR with you on all your digital devices. Go to pasechipotle.com/magazine and get ready to cook, learn, and enjoy Mexican food like you never imagined. The production of Pase Chipotle is something I greatly enjoy, and I know you do too, because I read all the comments, emails, and messages you kindly send to me. Independent creators like myself bring diversity, empowerment, and opportunities to enrich our global cultural exchange, which is why the support of audiences with a passion for knowledge, creativity, and entrepreneurship is essential. If you enjoy this show, you can support it by leaving a review, recommending the podcast to a friend, and becoming a supporting member on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Chipotle Podcast and select the type of donation you want to make. Every donation makes a big difference. Go to patreon.com/Chipotle Podcast and be part of this delicious story. I love hearing from you. You can reach me by following the show on Twitter. You can find it as Chipotle Podcast or send me an email at hello@pasechipotle. You will find all the links in the description of the show. To find more information about this project, please go to pasechipotle.com. The next episode is coming at you really soon, and it will feature a great interview with a passionate cook, blogger, and entrepreneur, Nicole Macrinos, author of the blog Flan and Apple Pie. Tune in this November 6th. You really don't want to miss her story. Well, that's it for this episode. Thank you for listening. Feliz Dia de Muertos to everyone. Goodbye from me, my friends. Until the next time.